I'm Victoria Peat. Welcome along to today's live demonstration. Thank you so much for joining me. It's lovely to have you here. Sorry I missed last week. I just wasn't in the zone. I'm fine now. It's fine. I hope you're all really well. It's difficult times for all of us, and there are good days and bad days. I'm not going to lie. I had a really terrible couple of days last week. It's just, I don't know, it's just really hard. But yeah, I'm okay. I think it's better if I'm standing at my sewing machine. It's just, yeah, I find that so much easier because I kind of just switch off and it's all good fun. Anyway, so today what I'm going to do with you is I'm going to share with you a tutorial for making, where have I put my sample, for making a pincushion using your spools of thread pattern, because I know hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of you. I think it's over 1,000 people signed up for the newsletter to get a copy of the pattern, but I now have it for sale in my website. So there's loads of you that have the pattern, and loads of you joined in and you made the spools of thread. There it is. See another version. This is the one that I made in the sew along. Absolutely tons of you have made one of these, and I'm really pleased. So many people learned foundation paper piecing and made a foundation paper piecing project for the first time, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's really super. So I thought, well, as you've got that pattern, I thought I would come up with something else to teach you what else you could make with it, and I've come up with this pincushion design. If you don't have a copy of the pattern, I thought I would just quickly show you where you can get that from. There it is. It's available as a PDF download. It's perfect if you're doing foundation paper piecing for the first time. You will learn basic foundation paper piecing skills, and of course you've got all the sew along videos. There are 4 or 5 videos in total, 4 weeks, but there's a bonus video as well. With a sew along where I take you through absolutely everything that you need to do in order to create one of these. But we'll be using those same skills to make the little pin cushion. I thought that was just quite a nice a little project to do. So for the project, what we will need is a few bits and pieces. Let me just have a look on the iPad just to see if I can get on to see whether there's anyone that has any questions, because then if you've got questions as you go along, I can try and answer those. Hold on, technology fail. Here we go. Right, I think I'm there. I just can't quite get the comments. If anyone has them, let's see if that's going to work. Hold on. They're doing a bad job. I'm coming. Right, okay, we're there. iPad on. People watching. Super. I can't see who is watching for some reason. That's because I'm in my husband's account. Right, okay, so we're making pincushion with your spools of thread pattern. So you will need a copy of the pattern, which is available to buy online. That's got everything in it. You will need a selection of fabrics, and the fabrics that I'm using today, 2 of them are from Lewis and Irene in the cocktail party range. And I've chosen one of them because I'm going to talk a little bit about fussy cutting. I thought that would be useful. A couple of background fabrics, one of which is a bumbleberries for the background, and then I've got a macawa, I can't remember which colour that was, in olive green type shade. I've got an add a quarter ruler, I've got a standard ruler, plus I've got a 6 by 12 inch ruler, rotary cutter, glue pen, I've got some pins, and I've got some sewing clips. I've also got 2 sewing machine feet that I'll need for this project. I have got a standard foot and I've got my 1/4 inch foot, so I've got both of those available to use. What I'll do is, after this, I have a blog post that I will have, which I'll put up online, and that will tell you exactly in terms of the fabrics, what sizes you need to cut and whatever to do to make the pin cushion. But what we're going to do is we're going to start off with just a little reminder on foundation paper piecing for anybody who's missed it or would like a bit of a refresher. I know most of you are there, so just sit back and relax and enjoy. What I'm going to do is I've made one of the end spool pieces, so I've made a C, and we need to make an A section, so a B section. So I'm going to make one of those, and I'm going to make this central section, but I'm going to do a bit of fussy cutting on that as well. So let me just make some space. So just pop. I'm going to start off with my A foot on the sewing machine, which is just a standard clear foot. I'm putting my 1/4 inch foot in my little bowl. Remind me if I get lost later. Right, so to begin with, let's start off with this A section, because this one's nice and easy. It's only got 3 sections to it. With the foundation paper piecing, you're always sewing or in this method, you're sewing through the paper and you're sewing in order. So you're sewing section 1 to section 2, and then you're sewing section 3. So we're going to start off with this middle section here. What I thought would be nice is, as you can see here on this sample, is I've done a little bit of fussy cutting. So I've just made sure that we've got that glass and a bit of this bit of fruit sitting alongside. So I thought that's quite nice to do. So if you've not done any fussy cutting before, that's effectively what it means. Right. Okay, so I've got here this nice square of fabric from Lewis and Irene, very kindly gave me some nice fabrics, and this is one of them, so I thought I would use that today. So the piece that we're looking for is on foundation paper piecing, you're looking at the section within the solid lines. So I've just drawn those on the reverse so that you can see that. Ordinarily I would use my light box, but I haven't tested to see whether you can see the light box on the camera or not. So I've just drawn that on the back to make that clearer for you to see. But if you want at home, you can do the same thing, and then you can just use, if you have a light box, then fabulous. If not, use a window or something like that. That all helps with your fussy cutting. So for this, I'm just going to fold these sides back a little bit just to see what kind of size we can fit in. So that this tall drink looks like it might be quite nice, but I'm going to be really fussy and say the problem is that on here, the top of the straw, that's going to be very, very tight to fit that in. We could do the glass with the olive in. That sits quite nicely. Or we could just do something like this nice little vine here, or the tumbler. The tumbler might be quite nice in the middle. Let's see, the champagne glass. See, the champagne glass is a little bit tight as well, but I think we could do this, the champagne glass. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of glue and I'm going to place that on the wrong side of the template in the middle. And I'm going to just place this so that I know that we're aiming for this glass here. So I'm going to start underneath to make sure that that glass is evenly left and right. Oh, this one is going to be a bit tight. And I'm going to slide it up until I think I've got it in the middle. And I'm just going to, oh, I've got it the wrong way around. Turn your fabric over, right sides down. Was anyone shouting, letting me know I was doing that the wrong way around? Right, so right side down for your first piece. I'm going to slide it along, give it a little press and just see whether I've got it centralized this way vertically. I think I just want to pop that down a little bit, because if I pop that down a touch, what I can do is I can get the base of this this champagne glass and the bubbles in the top and just a little bit of that flour. So I think that's kind of where I want it to be. Now, fussy cutting can be very, very wasteful. But if you're careful about it, and particularly when you're English paper piecing, if you decide that you're using a piece in the middle, what that doesn't mean is that you have to sacrifice everything around the outside. So what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't then start chopping in here to cut out that one section. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and cut around these outsides. Now this piece here, the solid line is the stitching line, so we need to make sure that we've got 1/4 of an inch to this side of the solid line and 1/4 of an inch to this side. The top and bottom on this particular piece, because this is a whole section piece, these little pieces here have already got the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and cut. I'm just going to go a little bit bigger. I'm going to go 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to use my little ruler. These are super little ruler. It's 1 inch by 6 inch. Really, really handy. You don't see them very often, but if you do see one, super useful, really useful. So I'm just going to trim off. Your rotating cutting mat would be absolutely super here. Mine I can't fit in, but I have ordered a new one just to see whether I can get everything in on the screen, because it's a lot easier if you can avoid having to pick up and put down your blade all the time. And, well, that's just a smidgen needed on that one. See, I didn't quite get into the corners. It's always a bit tricky to see whether you've made it. I'm just going to trim those bits off. Come on, off you come. And that last one. Okay, so yes, I mean, you've now got a big old hole in your fabric, but by not cutting it in from the sides, it means that you can use all of the print. So it's all available for you to use for other projects. You might use that tumbler that was quite nice in the middle of a hexie, or you might choose to cut this section down the side here in a border or something. It just leaves it as flexible as possible. So bear that in mind when you're fussy cutting. Right, so we've now got our first piece, and if I hold that up to the light, I can see that that has just got into the right spot. Just. Right, what we now need to do is, this is where your add a quarter ruler comes in. If you've not used an add a quarter ruler before, they're absolutely fabulous for foundation paper piecing. They've just got this extra little lip on the side that folds up again, that butts up against the folds in your foundation paper piecing. Really super. Right, so what I need to do is, I've got my background fabric pieces, and I'm going to place this next to this one. I just want to trim this one down so that it's an accurate 1/4 of an inch. So I've got a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance sticking out from the underside of this piece. I'm doing piece 3. Let me just do it in the right order for you so that you're not getting confused if you've not done this before. So I'll trim that so that it's nice and accurate. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to place this raw edge up against a raw edge on my background piece. I'm going to place those right sides together. I'm then going to take that over to my machine. So I'll just pop over here. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to stitch on the line between piece 1 and piece number 2. I'm going to stitch on that solid line. I've got my fabrics right sides together. I'll place that underneath. And I'm just going to reduce my stitch length to something like a stitch length 1. Have a play with your machine, have a play, just see what's going to work. It depends a little bit on the paper that you're using, whether you're using standard copier paper, you're using something a little bit more lightweight, or whether you're using paper specifically for foundation paper piecing. Have a try. But you do need to reduce your stitch length, because what that will do is that will allow you to remove papers at a later stage. So what I've done is, I've stitched all the way along that line, all the way along that solid line between piece 1 and piece 2. And then what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take that over to the pressing board, and I'm going to press that open. Not open, press that over. So I'll give that a little press. Oh, I've ordered myself a little treat. I've ordered myself a wooden clapper. Very excited. I love my wall pressing mat. But to have a clapper as well would be absolutely super. Just to take it, it just draws out the heat from your pressing. It's super. Okay, so we've done piece number 1 and piece number 2. We're now going to do piece number 3. So I'm going to fold that back. I'm going to place that right sides together with my next piece of fabric. Place that on top. What I tend to do is, I tend to pick up the fabric like this. I'll take it over to my machine, and then I'll flip the paper over and slide it under. And you can just take that opportunity just to check that on the underside, that this under fabric hasn't slid out of the way, or it hasn't folded underneath. Because with foundation paper piecing, if you make a mistake, because you've reduced that stitch length, to unpick that, it's just a really miserable job. I'm working on something at the moment, which is a miniature alphabet that we can use in conjunction with the spools. And I've made some mistakes with that. And I tell you what, it's just easier just to completely start again on the section. I've got a couple in my little bin here. Right, so I've sewn it along here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to press that away. Give that a press. And then, excuse my hair. Ooh, loads of grey hair. And it's really long and dry on the ends. Oh, I need help. I need help. Right, so what we've got here, so we've got piece number 1, piece number 2, and piece number 3. From the reverse, you can see how my fabrics are all sticking out past this outside dotted line, which is the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance that you need. I'm going to go in and I'm going to trim up to that dotted line. I'm going to just use my 6 by 12, or it's actually 6.5 by 12 inch ruler. again, you can see where having a rotating cutting mat is really, really useful here. Trim those off, and the last one. That, sort of. And then you've got there is your completed section piece. So that's all trimmed off. And that's all ready to go. So what I'll do now is I've done one of the other spool ends. So I'm going to add that on in a minute. And I'm just going to do another one. What I thought I would do in this one is, I know if you've watched the sew along, you will have seen me do all of this. The pattern includes instructions for cutting out fabrics. So I'll give you cut X number of pieces this big and cut some bigger. But what I'm going to do in this part of the demonstration is I'm going to show you how I do foundation paper piecing without cutting those rectangles out in advance. More often than not, when you buy a foundation paper piecing pattern, and I'm exactly the same, with my basic block patterns, I don't tell you what size of rectangle to cut, because actually sometimes by cutting rectangles, you're wasting even more fabric than you would be ordinarily. You know, the triangles, you can end up with large pieces of fabric that just get wasted or put onto the scrap pile to be used for another time. But today I thought I would show you a slightly different method where I cut from a larger piece of fabric. So I'm going to do that with the other end of the spool. So the ends of the spool I've decided are going to be in this darker green colour. So I've got, I'm going to use exactly the same method. I've just got a scrap of green fabric that I've used to make the other end of the spool. I'm going to stick a dab of glue on behind section number 1. And I'm going to place that on my green fabric. Again, you just need to think where you're placing it. Don't place it right in the middle, because you're going to cut off absolutely loads that you don't need to. So I'm going to place this. I know that this edge is needs to be 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to pop that on. I've got the little the holes where on the side of the selvage. So I'm just going to avoid those, making sure that those little holes don't appear in the main part of the section. So I'm just going to place that down. I'm then going to fold back against line number 2, which is where we're going next. I'm going to take my add 1/4 ruler and I'm going to trim off that one edge, because that then gives us a starting point for where we want to attach this piece, piece number 1 to piece number 2. Piece number 2 is a piece of background fabric. So I'm going to take that edge, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that the fabric underneath here is going to be big enough to cover piece number 2. So you've got piece number 2 here in a triangle shape. So ignore this bit of fabric here, ignore this bit of fabric here, ignore all of this here. What you're trying to do is you're looking at the relationship between the piece on the top and this fabric here that we're adding. So this fabric has got to be right sides up. And again, like before, you could just stick it in the middle, but you're going to cut all over the place. So what I would do is I would look for a straight edge. So I would place that here, because then I know that I'm just going to use this piece underneath, or I could use this piece. It depends a little bit on how big the piece is and whether the grain matters, or whether this has got a print on it, as to whether you can put it on an angle. But just bear those things in mind as you go along. I'm going to just place this against here for argument's sake. And I'm not going to worry too much that this piece underneath isn't exactly lining up. I'm just going to trim that afterwards. So I'm going to take that over to my machine again. I wish I'd sorted out my my computer. I'm just going to sort out my computer. Oh, here we go. Lots of lovely comments. I'm really sorry. Husband's iPad, I do need training. The children here, I should have got them to do it. Helen Todd, you're my coffee break from gardening. Oh, it's good. Weather here, rubbish. Not gardening weather, not that we have a garden. But yeah, oh, lovely. Oh, super nice. Jennifer Durkin, hello, how are you? Sending you lots of love and a big fat virtual hug. Hello, who's that? You all right? Good, yeah, children, they're fine. And Pamela, morning. Hello, hello. Sue Burbage is here as well. Hi, Sue. Oh, and Yolanda. Hola, ¿cómo está? Estoy bien. Hola, un poco cansado y aburrido. But there you go. So that's the extent of my Spanish. I'm learning lots, but not using it. So, Anna. Super, Grant, I'm glad about that. Right, okay, so back to the sewing machine. So I'm going to sew along that line between the 2 and the 3. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this paper back out the way, and then I'm just going to trim off. I'll bring this up to the machine, up to the camera so that you can see. So I placed the green on top of the yellow. I didn't match up these 2 lines, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to just trim off this yellow so that it is kind of lining up a bit, because what you don't want is you don't want excess fabric behind your block. I'll take my ruler and just trim off that little bit there, so that that's nice and straight. I'm then going to pop open that, and then from the other side, I'm going to press away as I would do normally. I'm sorry if you can hear my husband next door whittering away on his conference call. He's louder than I am. Guessing away. Okay, so now we've pressed that away. Now what we can do is we can go in and we can trim off that yellow. So I'm going to just take my rotary cutter and I'm going to go just around the outside, along here and here. Oh, and Becky's here as well. Hi, Becky. Does that mean that the kids are watching? I haven't got the girls with me today. My children, well, not children, because Emily would be really upset if she thought she was friends with Alex. No offense, Alex. But my daughter Charlotte is dear friends with Millie as well, so that would be really nice for them to see each other. Right, so what I've done is I've just trimmed off that yellow, so you can see here, actually I've just used this tiny little bit in the corner, and I've got this bit on here, so I haven't got loads and loads of wastage. If I'd had to cut a rectangle for that, there would be more wastage. Now, you're not always going to get this absolutely perfect, and you will end up with funny little pieces, but for me, I find it easier to work from a bigger piece. I wouldn't always work from a piece exactly this big. I would maybe cut it down a little bit, because it can get a little bit unwieldy, but it's definitely worth a try. Right, so now I'm going to do the piece piece number 3, which is also a background piece. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but on the other side. I'm going to fold back on that line between next to 3. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to trim off the rest of that green, because that's at a bit of a funny angle. So I'm going to place that edge here on another new edge. So I'm going to place that in here. And just straighten that out a little bit. So again, we're looking at just this white triangle here, just this piece that's got to sit on top of the fabric. So the fabric's got to cover that space underneath. Nancy's here. Hi, Nancy. Hello from a rather chilly East Lothian. Oh, shame. I did see that the weather looked glorious over the weekend for much of the UK, but then got a bit stinky again. So I'm really sorry that it's got a bit stinky again. Our weather has just been, it's just been so much rain. The sun's out now, but oh my word, we've had so much rain and a massive thunderstorm the other night. So sewing along the line. We moved. No, I've done the wrong one. Overhead. You got my face instead. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did before. I'm just going to trim off that yellow underneath. The green's already trimmed, but I'm trim the yellow off. And I'm going to press that yellow away. And then I'm going to trim around the outside of this piece here. So we've got this big yellow piece. We've got the piece underneath 3, so I'm going to trim just to the outside of this dotted line. Right, so that's my yellow background piece done with. So I've got the 2 little bits. What I need now is the piece number 4. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and I need to do the piece number 4, which is another dark green piece. I'm just going to pull back the pattern piece, but because I've stitched through all the way through to the end of the pattern piece, I'm just going to tear the paper a little bit so that I can fold on the line between piece 1 and piece 4. I'm going to fold back. I'm going to trim away the excess green. And I now need a piece of green that's going to sit big enough to be to cover piece number 4. So I'm going to place that against here, and this piece doesn't quite work out for me. Oh no, it might do. Look at that. It just squeezes in. Just. So I can just put that in here. It seems daft that I've just cut that off to sew it back on, but it's good to understand that process, because what you might do is you might have the end of the spools in 2 different colours. So this, the spools, when they're completed, looks like this. You might have a darker colour between the 2 halves of the base of the spool. I'll place that on, squeeze it right in. Take it over to the machine and flip that paper over and sew along the line. Right, come on. So that's sewn on between 1 and 4, and I'm going to press that fabric away. Whilst I'm here, I'm also going to press the other one, which I did in preparation, just to make sure that's nice and flat and ready. I'm just going to stick something flat on that whilst I'm finishing this one off. Okay, do you like my little tin? It's a little Marks and Spencer's sweetie tin. I think I had chocolates in it. Love them. Okay, so now we've got these 4 pieces on. From the other side, you can see the fabric sticking out. I'm then going to trim off that excess using my 12x6 ruler. You could use the smaller one, but I find the bigger one easier to use because you can spread out the pressure of your hand across the piece. And I just use the lines on the ruler to line up with the solid lines on the piece to make sure that I'm trying to cut in a straight line and reduce. Now, if you haven't trimmed off your paper pattern pieces directly on that dotted line, what you might like to do is, what I mean is sometimes when you do foundation paper piecing and you trim your pattern pieces, you trim to the dotted line. Some people prefer to leave a little bit of gap just around the outside. It means that you haven't got to cut out these pieces 100% accurately. If you decide to do that and you leave that little gap around the outside and it comes to this point where you're trimming the fabrics away, what you've got to bear in mind is that you'll be trimming through paper and through fabric. So you may not want to use a brand new, I don't know, it depends on your thoughts on blades, but you may not want to use a brand new blade. You might want to use one that you save for paper, or just bear in mind that if you are trimming through the paper in that way with foundation paper piecing, that you'll just need a new blade once you're finished. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Right, so we have got now, we've got a completed spool middle and we've got the 2 completed ends, because I did magically one earlier. Oh, Lauren's here. Oh, hi, Lauren. How are you? She says, hi, Victoria. Wish I sewed. No, she's a fabulous knitter. And just popped on to see you in action. Fabulous job. Love your setup too. Yes, it took a lot of head scratching. Lauren is my birthday buddy. We met on Ravelry, which is a fabulous, fabulous website. If you knit, then try Ravelry. It is super, absolutely super. Right, so what we need to do is we need to join these spools together, and it looks here like, oh my word, what have I done? These aren't going to match. But remember, you're matching up your 1/4 inch seam allowances, not the raw edges. I'm going to go on this underside, and I showed you this in the spools of thread sew along, is the points that we're matching. Actually, let me get the instructions out and I can show you where I circled it. Is the points that we're matching on here, I've circled in orange. Let me see, will that focus? So it's that point on B and that point on A, and the same again between C and A. We're trying to match up those points. So this is where I'll take my long pins, and I'm going to place that from the paper side through that junction. So that's going through the seam allowance. It's 1/4 inch from the edge, and it's at the point where the background piece meets the spool piece. I hope you can see that. I'm going to do the same thing on the middle of the spool section. So it's going along that solid line and through the stitching line. Just rejiggle that around and about. So I've got that on my my corresponding piece that I'm trying to join together. What I'll do is I'll then take, I'll watch very carefully, and you can see with the pins, that's not a problem. When you pull out this pin here, you'll see where that hole is, and then I'm going to pop the pin on the other piece into that hole. So I'm going to whip that out. I'm going to poke that in that hole. So I now know that those two holes and those 2 points are matching. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other side of the pattern pieces. So I'm going to take that out. I've got my thumb where the hole was, just so that I can see it. You need your glasses on, maybe. And then I've got those two, and those are perpendicular to that seam line, just to try and make sure that they're going to sit in the right place. I'll then take my sewing clips and hold those in place, because obviously you can't run this through your sewing machine with your pins sticking out. So I'll take my pins out and take it back over to the sewing machine. If you're trying to sew complicated seams together and you're not comfortable about what you're doing, you can always increase your stitch length for this particular seam. Just increase it, and then you can open it and check. And if it's not quite right, you can unpick it, and then you can sew it again. But today, just for quickness, I shall just wing it and hope for the best. Hold your breath, everyone. Oh, yeah, and the crowd go wild. So there we go. So that's one half of the spool. Then we're going to add the other half in exactly the same way. So I'll stick a pin through that hole and a pin through the other one. And then the other half. Okay, do the same thing. Take the pin out, put the other pin in. And then the other way. So for anyone who's just joining, we are doing Pincushion today. We're using our spools of thread, because you might be thinking, oh my word, Groundhog Day, we're back again with spools. But we're about to move on to making a pincushion. So a different way that you can use your pattern rather than just making the little wall hanging. We like a bit of versatility in patchwork and quilting. So removing the pins and sewing along that joining line. Ready? How's this one going to look? Oh yeah, that one's okay as well. I can show you that one. Happy with that. Looking good. Let me give that a press, and then you can have a proper look. I've still got the papers in. Oh, it looks nice. I like it with the little glass in the middle. Cute prints, aren't they? So there we go. There is your spool complete. So that's a useful reminder for anyone that needed it. Right. So now, as I mentioned earlier, I will put all the information, and a couple of images will go up onto the website as to all of your dimensions. What we do have is we're adding on some sides and some top and a bottom, and we're adding the base or bottom of the pincushion. So I have got a couple of sides that we're going to add on first. Then we're going to add the top and the bottom after that. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to add this piece of fabric to the side of this one. And I can't remember, because I prepped this the other day, whether I was accurate with my cutting or whether I just kind of roughly cut. I can't remember. We're going to sew, so I'm not sure whether these will exactly match up, but we're going to sew this onto the side of here. But what you've got to bear in mind is that on the underside, you've got paper that you have, you've still got in place. So what I will do is, just to try and keep this middle bit nice and solid, I'm going to leave most of the papers on, but I'm just going to take off this little bit on the underside of these seams where I've pressed. I'm going to just tear a little bit out. So that's on all 4 of those. I'm going to do that. Rip, tear, rip, tear. My grandmother used to say that, rip, tear, rip, tear. That's at birthdays and Christmases. Don't be polite with the paper, just rip, tear. Just take it all off. She said that, but then she also used to keep all the paper. It's very funny. She used to keep posh napkins, not like fabric ones, but paper serviettes from restaurants. So you never know when you need one, pop one in your handbag. Okay, so I've taken those little bits of paper out from underneath, because those are going to be a right royal pain in the rear end to take out. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to change onto my 1/4 inch foot for the construction. So this is all constructed using a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to pop that on my machine. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to change to a 1/4 inch setting on my machine, which is stitch number 4. So that moves my needle over to the right hand side. I'm going to take the one side piece. I'm going to place that right sides together. And you may pin or clip if you prefer. And this is a 1.8 seam allowance. I think I might just reduce it a little bit to make sure that I can get those papers out afterwards. Why is it not picking up? Come on. At the same time, and I would press that open or away if you like, and I'm going to just do the other one at the same time, and then I'll go to the iron. Place that right sides together, stick that underneath. Just making sure that what you can sometimes get is that the workings of the machine here will just catch the seams on the underside. So just make sure that those sit in the direction you want them to. So I've got those 2 sides. I'm going to press those with the seam allowances going towards the outer edge. Love these colours together. The olive green looks really nice with the yellow. Ooh, hot, hot. Right, so that's the central section done. I'm now going to add tops and bottoms, and you can see here I've just taken from that 10-inch square. I'll just cut off at the side. I'm just going to place that. So that's sticking off this side. We can trim it off afterwards. I've got my presser foot in a really weird place and I'm standing really weirdly. Very odd. Don't know why I've got it over there. Come on. Bring it over my next piece, place this one right sides down in the same manner. So you're just taking the little, the spool section and turning it into a little block. A little bit of sashing, or borders if you like, depending on how you're looking at it. So I've now got the top and bottom, and I'm going to press those as well. Ideally, I would press and leave to cool, but we're in a hurry, aren't we? Well, not in a hurry, but I'm sure you've got better things to do than to watch my ironing set and cool. Okay. So there we have, that's effectively the top of your pincushion. I've then got a base to add to that. I'm just giving it a little iron because there's one bit that's a bit wibbly. And we're going to place these two pieces right sides together. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I'm not too worried about these little pinked edges. Now, I would take out the papers if I were you now, but I won't do that because that's a really long time to have you sit and watch me remove the papers. So I'll leave that for today. It can't be that interesting. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I leave one edge open for turning. So on this sample here, this way I've just left, I think, 1.5 inches, something like that. Yeah, about 1.5 inches on one edge. I'm going to leave for turning it through and stuffing. So I'm going to take a couple of pins. Looks a bit wonky, Victoria. It's when you go for so many fast. And talking at the same time and changing the cameras. Excuses, excuses. Right, so what I'm going to do is I will pin a little bit more, but I'm going to sew from this pin. I'm going to sew to this edge here, round, all the way back round to this pin. At each end, I'm going to do a couple of reversing stitches just to secure that so that when you're turning it through, all your stitching doesn't come undone. What I am going to do is over at the machine, I'm going to put back onto a standard stitch length because we're not having to sew through any papers. Marie has joined. Hi there, Marie. This is way too detailed for me, but really enjoying the show, clever lady. Oh, thank you so much for joining. Have a look at if it is something that you fancy but you're worried about, just have a look at the sew along because you might find that actually it's okay. It's not so bad. So on this machine I've got, and I can't show you, let me just see if I can rearrange the camera. You can see all our mess in the background. I have got, I'll just move the camera up. Oh, is that making everyone seasick? There, this one here, this one's a locking stitch. So I'm just going to do a quick locking stitch before I start sewing to make it nice and secure. So it does a better job, you know, looks, can't get my words out. So that there's not too much pressure put on that opening when you come and turn it through. So I'm doing 1/4 inch all the way around. I'm going to eyeball that. Yeah, that's fine. Oh no, I thought I'd gone one stitch too far, but we're okay. I'm just going slowly to the edge because I'm trying to eyeball 1/4 inch from the the edge so I can just pivot. Make sure you keep your needle in the down position when you pivot. I'm going to sew along to approximately 1.5 inches. And I'm going to do a locking stitch again at the other end. Right, oh, that hasn't cut properly. So now I've sewn around all the outside edges and now I'm going to turn it through. Let's see, can I turn it through with the papers? Oh no, you know what, I said I wasn't going to take the papers off, but I will do because I think that is a bit too crinkly for me to turn that through easily. It's going to look overly awkward. So just take those out. So just think of it as if you've got a sheet of stamps and you kind of just gently pull them apart. Although these days, when you go to the post office, they, well, ours certainly does, they just print them off. And here in Gibraltar, they have got sheets of stickers, but they've all got their individual sticky backs, you know, peel away backs on them. There you go, all change, all change. So just be relatively gentle with the stitching. Don't pull too hard on the stitching if it's not coming away. You can always use something like a little spray bottle just to dampen down the edges a little bit, or you might have an old pair of tweezers, eyebrow tweezers, or tweezers that come with an overlocker if you do dressmaking as well as quilting. And then what I'm going to show you is you can just turn this through and turn it into a pincushion where it's just like a pillow, like a fat pillow. Or on the sample that I've got here has got a boxed out corner. So I thought it might be nice if I just showed you how I do a boxed out corner. Okay, that will do for what we're doing. That will do. So I'll turn that through. And so I'll stick my finger in the opening and I'll put my finger into one of those corners. So I've got my index finger in one of those corners, place that with my thumb and I'll just push it through that hole to start pulling it through. And do the same thing with one of the other edges. Pull it through. You could do with a point turner or a pokey device of sorts. I've got an old one here that I've used with all sorts of glue and all sorts. But just be really careful when you're poking those edges through. Don't use anything too sharp, so don't use an awl or anything, or be very careful if you're going to use a pencil, because you'll cause yourself all no end of problems. Right, so if you wanted to, you could just stuff that and create like a pillow shape pincushion, which is quite nice. So you would stuff that with small amounts of stuffing and just sew that edge closed. If, however, you want to do like I have done here and make little box corners, you can do that. So let's have a look at how we do that. Turn it back through, sing amongst yourselves. Okay. So these corners, what you need to do, well, not what you need to do, what you would like to do is you want to try and make sure, and I hope you can see this because I've used two different fabrics so that you can see the contrast, is that you've got the seam. So this long seam that you've got running along these edges, that's the one that you've just sewn. What we're about to do is we're going to sew acrossways. But ideally what you want is for these two seams to match up. Really important in bag making because it's not just about making seams that match up. If you don't match those up and you're too far out, it can actually make things a little bit skew-if and they won't sit as straight. So understanding how that works and how to do that is actually really important. So in order to do that, the way that I would do this on a project such as this is that I will take, you've got the back side and the front side. If you pull those away from each other, you can then create almost like a little triangle here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and aim. I'm going to open up these seam allowances. And you can press them if you like. Might make the job a little bit easier. I'll just finger press that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a pin. So I've just pushed those seam allowances open. I'm going to put a pin through the middle of this seam allowance. And I'm going to aim for it to come out of the middle of the seam allowance on the other side of that triangle. So if you can just feel with your hands kind of whether you're sort of in the right place to begin with, and stick a pin through. That'll do. So I've put a pin through just to make sure that that seam on this side is running exactly the same place as the seam on this side, and then you can even out this triangle here, and then you can either stick in some clips, but I find it easier at this point to just use some longer sewing pins to try and keep those in place, because I find the clips, particularly for quilting weight fabric, they're just a little bit unwieldy and a little bit heavy. And then I'll do the same thing on the other sides, the other corners. So I'll finger press open, and you're trying to make sure that this end point here is at the very end of this triangle. Try not to let it roll to one side or the other. When you're doing this, you'll see what I mean. You'll be able to feel it. Oh, try and get my fingers in. So even that out, try and make the triangle as even as possible. Feel for that seam. Stick a pin through. Oh, that one's not quite straight, so I just need to move the fabric behind. Not quite. Nearly. I'll give it one more go and then I'll move on. Otherwise you'll be here all day watching me do that. Right, so that I'm happy with. So I'm going to stick a couple of pins in that. And we'll do the same with the other corners. So this really is just about how comfortable you are with manipulating the fabric, and as I mentioned earlier, you can just do a pillow version if you're happier with that. But opening out those seam allowances just makes it easier for you to feel the seam on the underside and whether you're getting those matched up. There, that'll do. Put in a couple of pins just to hold that flat. So it just means that when you go across the sewing machine, you've got your corners all ready. Haven't trimmed any of my threads as I've been going along. There's threads all over the place. Open out those seam allowances. So all your measurements, and I've done some nice illustrations I'll have on the website. I'll try and get that on probably later this afternoon. Depends on the children. They haven't been outside for any exercise today, so we shall go out and do some exercise, get some fresh air. I went out first thing this morning. I've been sleeping really terribly. I don't know if anyone else is the same, but I'm really struggling with sleep. I can't get to sleep, and oh, it's awful. So yeah, I went for a walk first thing this morning to try and get the body moving a bit more. Right, from here, what we need to do now is we need to mark where we're going to sew. And what you want to do is you want to measure from, and I can't remember for the life of me what measurement I said, but we're going to mark from this point. You're not marking from the ends of these seam allowances, you're marking from this little bit here, because that's the very tip. And we're going to mark a line that goes across, because that's where you're going to sew. And let me just, if I look at it, see if I can decide. So I've boxed out approximately an inch. Yeah, so it's half an inch down from that point. Perhaps if I do it on the same side as my pins. And you want to be, this line, you need to make sure that it is running parallel to that seam line. Otherwise you can end up wonky. And I'm just using a heat erasable pen. Always test any pen as to whether it comes out or not and doesn't leave a ghosting mark. But I've measured half an inch from almost like the valley part of that seam, and I've measured half an inch down, and I've drawn a line perpendicular to this seam line, and I'm going to sew across there. I'm doing that on all four corners. So mark again, half an inch. You can go a little bit smaller if you like, or you can go a little bit longer. I would just say don't go too long, because if you look at the pincushion, if you make this seam much longer than about an inch, it starts to encroach on this part of the design, and I think you just end up being a little bit tight, and this ends up being really deep. And I mean, I've overstuffed this completely. I've put too much in, but it would make it quite a deep pincushion, which is great, but it will just encroach onto the spool. So just bear that in mind. Oh, that corner looks very skewy. Oh, Lauren loves the little pincushion. Lauren, do you mean this one or do you mean this one? Which one do you mean? Because a girl can never have too many pincushions, obviously. Got far too many now. I never really used to use them. I always used to use, and I don't have it with me actually, one of those magnetic ones, because they are fab. They're really good if you drop all your pins on the floor, which I've done many, many times. They're great for hoovering them all up. Right, so back over to the sewing machine. I've marked up all of those corners, and I'm going to sew. I think I might just put my standard foot back on, because the 1/4 inch, we're not sewing a 1/4 inch seam, and the 1/4 inch foot, if you've not used one before, has got this like steering rudder type thing, and I can't ever get the light right on this bit here. It's got that rudder, so that will catch on this fabric, so you're better off going back to a standard foot. You're doing a standard stitch length. And then I'm going to take my pins out. I'm going to do a little reverse stitch, or you could do a locking stitch. And I'll do all 4 corners. Oh, I didn't reverse. Oh dear, fired from the factory. Dodgy work. Take your pins out. Try not to sew over your pins. It's not good for your machine or your needle or your health, because you don't want a pin breaking and going flying off somewhere. And the last corner. Oh, that's not good. I'm sitting here with my hand over there, so ready to press the button. That's not very good, sorry. Okay, so I've done all those 4 corners. You can go in and snip those corners off if you like, but then you can just turn through to the other side, and we'll see what a hash job I managed of those. Keep your fingers crossed. Okay. Oh, that one's a good one. That one's a good one. That one's a good one. That one's not bad. I think I'll take that. I'll take that. So here you have your little boxed off pincushion starting to take shape. Look at that. So there you've just got those little corners boxed out. So you absolutely can avoid that step, forget it, and just go with a pillow version, or you can go with a version that's like that. Now what you need to do is you need to stuff your pincushion. I tend to use I'll use either like toy stuffing, take off small amounts and poke them in, and I'll also add in crushed walnut shells. This one I've got completely with crushed walnut shells because it gives it a good, really a decent weight to it, and will also sharpen your pins as you pop them in. On this one I've done a bit of both. for that. I can't show you stuffing today because I've run out of toilet stuffing. I put too much in this one and I've not got enough to do another one. I've ordered some more, but with the Easter break and everything, it's not arrived in time. So you're going to have to imagine me stuffing. Then what you need to do to close up your side so that you can't see it, this one here, this is the one that I have done. Can we focus that? Almost. What you need to do is do either a ladder stitch or a whip stitch, depending on what you want to do. I've got a couple of tutorials that I put on YouTube a while ago that were based around English paper piecing, and it talked about doing a whip stitch and doing a ladder stitch, but they're really useful just for what you're doing here, and you want to close that up, so that's really useful. So there you go, that's pretty much it. That's your little pincushion for your spools of thread. So I just thought that would be a really nice thing to do to show you another way that you can use your pattern. If you don't have a copy of the pattern, I'll just remind you on where you can get that. If I can press my buttons. That's the pattern that you have available. Whilst you're on the website, if you're having a look, do sign up to the newsletter. Because you will get a free pattern for a tote bag. That's something a little bit different. I've been doing a lot of patchwork and quilting, but I'm actually a relatively experienced bag maker. I worked for a guy in London doing bag making and leather working in bits and pieces, so I have got a bit of a bag making background as well. But that's just for a free tote bag pattern. It's a really, really lovely pattern. It's lined and it's really nice. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a tutorial for that as well. So if you sign up to the newsletter, you can get a copy of that pattern at the moment. If you're already a subscriber to the newsletter, I'll be sending a newsletter out shortly, and that will have a link in there so that you can download a copy too if you would like to. Right, the only other thing I wanted to mention very briefly is I am doing the little mini A to Z of foundation paper piecing that you can that will be compatible with these spools, and I've designed them so that they can be added in, and I've done a little star and a few other little characters as well. That will be coming out shortly, and I will be doing a free tutorial as well for turning your spool into a needle book. So keep your eyes peeled for that for the next couple of weeks. Once I've got a few more supplies, I'll be able to do that with you as well. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, do subscribe to the channel, and you can keep up to date with all my new videos. But that's it from me today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Have a look on the website later on today, and you'll have all the measurements and some instructions, and I'll link back to this video if you get stuck. But if not, you know where I am. Just message me, let me know if you've got any questions, and I will see you soon. Bye.